focusing on first on the origins and history of Theraplay, both in the USA and in Finland. So we will invite Phyllis Booth and Sandra Lindaman from the Theraplay-yhdistys to give us a recap on the history and the roots of Theraplay. And would you...
I just want to tell you how we started. In 1965, the Head Start program in the United States was developed. And that was a preschool program for 3- and 4-year-old children from low economic families, that is, families that perhaps would have had less opportunity to interact and stimulate with their children. And the idea was that we would make a difference in the children's preparedness for school and their general healthy development. Anne Jernberg, by that time, had gotten her PhD, and she became the director of the psychological services for the Head Start program in Chicago. That was a huge assignment. And then she recruited all the people she knew who had had any experience with children, and I was certainly one of the ones she knew. And we went into the classrooms and identified children who needed help. And that would be the children that the teacher said, I can't keep this child in my classroom. He's always hitting kids, or he's running out of the classroom. Or at the way other extreme, this child is just sitting in the corner not doing anything. So we happily went into the classrooms, and in the first summer, we identified more than 200 children who needed help. And then we had a problem, because there was no way we could get 200 preschool children from low-income families any kind of treatment. So Anne, who was just always courageous, creative, a little audacious, said, we're going to do a program, we're going to do something. And so she actually initially knew a young woman who was really good with children, and so she asked her to just go in and work with one of the children. Now, just at the time that she began this program, I was there when we identified those 200 children. Then I went away for a year. I went to London. I was there in 69, 70, and it was at the Tavistock Center. Once a week, John Bowlby came and gave us talks about attachment, and his first book about attachment came out that year. The Robertsons showed their films. I don't know whether you know the Robertson films, but if you don't, you should see them, really documenting the devastating effects of separation and loss on children. And I also attended case conference meetings with Winnicott in his home and heard him give a lecture. So I had some interesting contacts. When I came back to Chicago, Anne said, let me show you this film we've made. Now you can put her up. I told Sandra she couldn't put her up yet. So this is Pat. We'll talk about her a little bit more in a minute. But Anne showed me the film, and then she showed me the new Theraplay room that had been built in the office downtown in Chicago. It was a big room, not huge, not like this, but a big, comfortable room. Mats on the floor, huge pillows, with very inviting room. It had 2 observation rooms on 2 of the 4 sides. And in one of them, we would meet with parents. She would meet with parents, and while I worked with the children. In the other one, we had video equipment. So right from the start, we were filming what we were doing. Now, so I came back, and she'd already started this program, and I found myself really bringing some of the ideas back with me from my wonderful experience at the Tavistock Center. I remember saying to her, we are creating Winnicott's holding environment. There was a kind of security that the parent provides, and a sensitivity and observation, but not an interference. So there's a kind of protective quality to it. And I think the other aspect of what I was brought back had to do with the idea of changing the internal working model of the child. Obviously, we could not provide a treatment for all these children if only one person knew how to do it. So we put ads in the newspaper saying we wanted people to come and see whether they could, we wanted to interview them to see whether they would make good mental health workers. Now, we were not expecting people to have technical training. We were not expecting people to be sophisticated about psychoanalytic interpretation. We just wanted to see what they could do if they were with another child. So we had a big room. This was a bigger room than the Theraplay room, and we had them just in pairs role play what they would do with a child if they were alone with them for a session. And we chose the liveliest, most engaging people to become our mental health workers. And here's what I wanted to find here. If Stephen Porges had been around to give us the language, we would have said that we chose those who were the most able to use their social engagement system to create a sense of safety, connection, and shared fun. That's language that is very recently in my vocabulary. So we, having chosen the ones that looked to us as if they were going to be the most successful in engaging these children, we assigned them the task of going into the classroom, taking the child out one-on-one, and interacting with them the way parents do with their children. So I was back to the idea of good parenting and secure attachment. And we had weekly supervisory sessions so that they would go out and see a child 2 or 3 times a week. They would have an assignment of several children, so they were keeping pretty busy. And then we asked them to take notes and come in. And together we reflected on how the child might be responding and feeling, how they might be feeling toward their work and toward the child. We came up with new ideas for activities. I remember when I first invented the push me over game. Now, I made sure I wasn't a pushover. So, I wanted this to be a firm response here. And so we were very actively working on figuring out ways to interact with the children. And we averaged about 15 sessions per child, and it worked. Very withdrawn children like Pat became livelier and more engaging. The wild children who were hitting kids and running out of the room calmed down. Now, as you might guess or imagine, there was a lot of resistance to this off-the-cuff, untrained group of people who were going out and playing with the children on the part of the trained social workers who were involved in the Head Start program, but also the professionals that we all knew. So Anne made this first film. And this is the film she showed me when I came back from England. So this is Pat, who had been in her, like this, in the corner for 3 months. And so we had this, here she is again. Why don't you just go ahead? So I used to show this film. And this was the point when, in the treatment, initially Pat is very resistant and it takes quite a while. But the moment that I was able to show this scene, people always relaxed and said, oh, something's happening here. So Pat, I think we have a couple of more scenes. Here she is back in the classroom after 17 sessions. And 3 years later, this was an unusual thing that we were able to do, is to follow up the children that we made the films of. We interviewed her parents when she was, we were just outside of her house, and she was jumping rope with her friends. Clearly, she was an engaged, an active child. We talked to her father, who said, I used to not pay any attention to her. It was a big family. She was the next to the youngest child. She had a lot of responsibility to take care of the youngest child. And he said, now she's my favorite. So something big had changed in her, which made it so that we had not worked with the father, but he saw the change in her. So she was able to make a connection. So the 50 years since we began this work has been a long-term effort to figure out why, how, what was going on, how could we make it better. And so that was where I started with the Bowlby idea, and that these lively, engaged young people who had been involved with the children had changed their internal working model. The children had been seen in the faces of their workers, more appreciation, more love, more engagement, and the children had changed their view and were then able to reflect that in other times when they were, Pat with her father. Quite a few years later, I found in a later Bowlby book this quote, which I think is very nice. The pattern of interaction adopted by the mother of a secure infant provides an excellent model for the pattern of therapeutic intervention. And then Anne Jernberg also says, the best way to understand the principles and underlying theraplay is to rediscover the basics of the mother-infant relationship. Now, just one more point, and then I'm going to turn this over to Sandra. In our early teaching, people began to be interested in Theraplay. Families began to say, I think I'd like to have some help with my family here at home, and we began to see private clients in that Theraplay room. In the teaching, Anne would always start by saying, get a picture in your mind of what a parent does with a 9-month-old baby. And we would say, okay, what does she do? And we get this huge list of things, rocking, singing, feeding, throwing up in the air, a whole range of things. So this wide range of activities, Anne came up with the notion that we have some dimensions involved here. They're not just, what do I do now? There's the element of structure, and parents set clear safety. They provide safety, they provide predictability, and the message to the child is, I can rely on someone bigger and stronger to help me. Engaging activities, I always think of as the parent sees the child in an alert, awake state and comes in and smiles and begins to make some kind of connection. And the message to the child, I am seen and heard and felt, and I'm okay and not alone. Now, nurturing activities, if you think about a young baby, we think a lot about nurturing activities, rocking and singing and rubbing, lotioning, and gently caressing. The message to the child is, I am worthy of good care. And of course, parents do all kinds of challenging things too. So big You can take that step, come on. The message to the child is, I am capable, and other people think I am capable. So that's the beginnings of Theraplay. And Sandra's going to carry on a little bit about how I forgot to say that among those first mental health workers was a woman from Sweden. And she came back and wrote an article about Theraplay, and that's how it got to Finland. But Sandra is going to go on from here. So.
Okay, so I'll continue the story. So the woman who actually came from Sweden with her husband and worked in that Head Start program was Margareta Scholand. And when she went home eventually to Sweden, she wrote an article in the 1980s in a Swedish journal. And it was something like a new form of play therapy helps disadvantaged children in Chicago. And that article existed for a number of years until Katja Rantala, a psychologist from Finland, found that article and became very intrigued by it. And Katja then came to the United States to study Theraplay and came to a level 1 training with another Finnish person, Ulla Turku. And she eventually came home and told her colleagues being Jukka Makala, who came and studied with us. Lata Lesinias-Panula came and studied with us, and they came back for several trainings. In fact, Lata even met Sinikka Savola in Chicago for the first time, because Sinikka also came for training. And finally they said, we can't keep running to Chicago. You have to come and come to Finland. So that's what happened next. And in 1998, and we'll leave this up here for a moment, some of you will find yourself in that photo. This was the first Theraplay training in Finland in 1998, and you can see Jukka there in the front row, and I know we have a lot of people. We had another person from Sweden, Marianne Riska-Sundqvist from Sweden, who became a link to future Swedish trainings, and many other friends there. We also did a group Theraplay training associated with a university. I don't recall which university at the moment, but Helena Antila was the contact person there. So you see us with our handprints, not just a parent-child handprint, but everybody who was there at the training. That was a very important trip for us, and it became a series of trips. I think I've been to Finland myself 15 times. But obviously, it became important. Within a year, you formed your own Finnish Theraplay Association, when this is the symbol of the Finnish Theraplay Association. And so it was evident to us that we had such an interest here in Finland, and we also wanted there to be Finnish trainers, Finnish supervisors, Finnish Theraplay therapists, that we could not do this from the United States, and there needed to be, should be, and could be a Finnish group. And so the forming of the association, the translation of the second edition of the Theraplay book into Finnish, the research that was done by the work that Ilona Virako and Jukka Makala did in the SOS Villages was published, researched and published, which was a very important step, and I'll say more about some of the ramifications of all of this. We had then the first therapist cohort certified within Finland by Finnish supervisors, not by those of us from the United States, which included one person from Sweden. And eventually we began to have international conferences where many people came together, the Finnish founders and other friends, at the first International Theraplay Conference in the United States in 2003. And then, ever since then, all of the other wonderful things that have happened. What I really wanted to say was that this relationship began perhaps with us teaching you something, and then you taught us so much. And I think that the relationship has really been marked with respect and reciprocity, that so many things have come from this association between Theraplay and Finland. For starters, Jukka Makala helped us a great deal with a deeper understanding of developmental sciences and interpersonal neurobiology and a lot of the underpinnings of Theraplay. That SOS report that was written led to connections with, there was an SOS village, only in the United States, there was one in Chicago, and there was one in Florida. And we connected with our one in Chicago because of the report that you wrote here, as well as in Korea, in Lithuania, in Greece, and in other countries in the world. The Theraplay book had been translated a long time ago into Japanese and into German when some initial people came over in the 80s and learned about Theraplay. But I think that the translation into Finnish kind of stimulated the growth of other countries translating the Theraplay book. And now it's in Danish, Dutch, French, Korean, and other languages are in the works. And then also the work that Ilona did and Sinikka by going to Botswana and other countries and taking Theraplay to people who could use it in their situations has led to a lot of inspiration for people to take Theraplay to other countries and to work in disasters and in great need in Fukushima after the tsunami, in Haiti after the earthquake, in the United States after Katrina. Many things have been done on Theraplay, kind of on some of the inspiring basis of some of the work that was done in other parts of the world. Finland gave us the idea of putting the parent session into our protocol, something we always did play and practice with parents, but to really do it even before we begin the work with the child, and that was Mina Laakso and Hanna Lampi who did a lot of that work. The idea of nurture and play with Kirsi Tomi and Sara Salo and Hanna Lampi, making a way that we can reach pregnant women and fathers, and very early work as we talked about today. So I think those are, oh, and I'm sorry, and of course taking the MIM, which was Anne Jernberg's mother's. Anne Jernberg was working with Phyllis, of course, at the beginning to create Theraplay. Marshak was Jernberg's mother, but it was never standardized. And now Sarah has worked so much on standardizing a way of scoring and thinking about the MIM, which is taking us forward into the future and using it in so many different ways. You've also brought a lot of people together from different countries here by having a Nordic conference and having conferences like this. So I just feel like it goes back and forth between us, as Theraplay goes back and forth between two people or groups of people. And so it gives me great pleasure to be here today to have a chance to acknowledge the respect and reciprocity that we have for each other. So thank you, and we're excited to continue on.